playing at the next level, and certainly wish her the best of luck with that, and excited to see another Gamecock go and hopefully have a lot of success at the professional level, in line with so many teammates that she's had that have gone on to to do the same thing. But I think that kind of creates an even more special feeling going into this weekend. And again, we knew for a while that Kamilla Cardoso was likely going to be going to the WNBA draft. She's been projected to be a top 5 pick for most of, if not all, the entire season. When you look at any of these mock drafts that have come out recently, she's somewhere towards the top, depending on which one that you're reading. So we knew this was likely going to be her last year. And again, she waited her turn. She came off the bench for a couple seasons, played her role, and played it very, very well after transferring in from Syracuse, and now finally got the opportunity to be a featured starter this year, and she has absolutely shined throughout the entire season. So it's been a great year, and now you look ahead to this weekend where, hey, if you win 2 more games, you're a national champion. And again, Cardoso's been a part of the national championship season from 2 years ago, but has the opportunity to do that as one of the featured parts of this team, not just somebody coming off the bench, which there's nothing wrong with that. But I think it's even more special when you know that you're playing an even bigger role, in the national championship at the end of the day. So they have the opportunity to do that. Again, coming up this weekend, and for everybody that has enjoyed watching Kamilla Cardoso in her couple years here at South Carolina, especially this season, opportunity to kind of take it all in and appreciate what you're watching, and again, a very rare combination of size and talent that you don't see a whole lot in women's basketball. And we've talked about it with all these matchups that Carolina's had. There aren't as many tall girls that can go head-to-head with her, and she's obviously used that to her advantage this season, which has been a lot of fun to to watch, and we'll get to see, hopefully, her final 2 games as South Carolina Gamecock coming up this weekend in the Final Four up there in Cleveland, where, of course, South Carolina will be taking on NC State on Friday night for right play in the national championship. Last night, we did have to find out who the other 2 teams on the other side of the bracket were going to be that would be fighting it out for a chance to go to the national championship game coming up on Sunday. And there was so much hype and anticipation going into last night, right? And rightfully so. You had so much star power and so many brands within the world of women's college basketball that were all coming together for this clash on one night. And a lot of the times when an event is built up to a huge degree, sometimes it doesn't deliver, or it delivers, but maybe not on the level that you were expecting it to. It's like, those games were good, but they weren't, oh my God, wow, amazing, great. Last night was that, though. Both of these games went back and forth, went right down to the wire, and truly showed off the best of the best in women's basketball. Again, a lot of star power in this game, not only from the player standpoint, from the coach's standpoint as well. And I think both games delivered. The main focal point of the night was obviously LSU and Iowa, who led things off at 7 o'clock last night on ESPN. And my goodness, they were shooting the lights out in the first quarter of that game. It seemed like neither team could miss, and both kind of fell into a rhythm a little bit as the game went along. But Iowa able to outpace LSU 94-87. And if you didn't watch this game, right? If you didn't watch a single second of this game, but you just asked for one stat, tell me what Caitlyn Clark did in that game. And I told you she had 41 points and was 13 of 29 from the field, you'd say, yeah, Iowa probably won that game, and you'd be 100% right. Just another incredible star-making type of performance for Caitlyn Clark as she continues to just wow in her, final couple of games of her college career. She's obviously going to be going on to the next level as well. It's one of those things where, Caitlyn Clark has obviously become very much a household name in women's basketball at the college level, but I know there's a lot of people that only see highlights of her, and not everybody legitimately sits down and watches entire Iowa games, or if you do, maybe you only did it, when they were in the Final Four national championship a season ago. When you really just sit down and watch Iowa play and watch what Caitlyn Clark does, it's mesmerizing. She's basically playing like Steph Curry. I mean, she's pulling up from 27, 28 feet out, draining threes, which there's good three-point shooting in women's basketball. It certainly seems like it's come along more in these past couple of years, but I mean, for somebody like her, the way she does it, 9 of 20 from beyond the arc last night. And it just seemed like every single one was crisp and nothing but net, just about every single time. It's so fun to watch. And look, you don't have to like Iowa. You don't have to like Caitlyn Clark. You can detest Caitlyn Clark as a person, as a personality, whatever it may be, but you got to respect the game. She is truly unbelievable. And it's going to be one of those things. Again, she, at best, has 2 more games in her college career coming up this weekend in the Final Four. And when she moves on to the next level, and I'm sure there will be a few more eyes on the WNBA because she's playing in it, but, we'll see how much that translates jumping from one level to the other. I mean, similar to Camille Cardoso, I hope you appreciate what you're going to get to watch this weekend for her ending of her college career, because she's truly a special talent that we may never see at this type of performance again, or certainly maybe a while until we see somebody that is as polarizing, I guess is the best way to describe it, because we've had a lot of great players come through women's college basketball over the years, but just something about Caitlyn Clark is more captivating to the national audience. And again, when you watch her play, you can see why, because it's exciting, it's fun, and just unbelievable some of the things that she's been able to do, out there. And last night was just another example of that. Again, 41 points. That was slightly better than a point a minute, because she was out there for all 40. She did not leave the court last night, and she made every one of those seconds count. On the flip side of things, Angel Reese, of course, the star of LSU, only ended up with 17 points. Now, she did tweak her ankle in the first half of that game. She kept fighting. She played 36 minutes last night, but it did seem like she was a little hobbled, a little bit limited. She still gave it a valiant effort, but when you look at her numbers in the second half, 1 of 10 from the field, only 4 points, 2 of 6 from free throws. She certainly was not playing at her normal level of strength, it seems like, and that did hinder her a little bit. Flau'jae Johnson did have a great night herself, pulling down 23 points, 10 of 18 from the field in her 37 minutes out there. So, teammates trying to pick up the slack a little bit, but it just was not quite enough for LSU to be able to take down Iowa's Hawkeyes win 94-87 and punch ticket to another Final Four, where Caitlyn Clark is pursuing the one thing she's not done in her college career, that being a national championship. And South Carolina could obviously be that team that is in the way of, and preventing her from getting to that if both those teams win on Friday night. And again, Iowa and LSU just kind of dominated the headlines. I'm watching on ESPN Get Up right now, and they're talking about Caitlyn Clark, and you have the small little scroll graphic at the bottom that mentions the other game from last night, which was UConn and Southern Cal, with UConn picking up the 80-73 win to go to yet another Final Four, something that Gino Auriemma and the UConn program have just become synonymous for over the years, and rightfully so. It's legitimately one of the greatest dynasties in the history of women's college basketball, and they're right back where they feel like they belong after not making it there a season ago, and a big part of them not making it there a season ago was Paige Beckers, and the fact that she was injured for most of last season with the knee injury, and was not there for the postseason run, and she's back this time, and she is making her presence known. 28 points last night in all 40 minutes of action for her. Aaliyah Edwards also 24 points. So the key superstars of this UConn team showing up last night against a very good and I don't want to say on the rise Southern Cal team, but a team that people may not pay as much attention to because they're out there on the West Coast and they're good. Everybody is aware that they're good, and Juju Watkins is a phenomenal player, and she went out there and had a great performance last night with with 29 points of her own. But people are a lot more familiar with UConn just because, again, they've been at the top of women's college basketball for a lot longer, and obviously East Coast team a little bit more featured in this area of the country. But regardless, even though LSU and Iowa, kind of stole the headlines last night, UConn and Southern Cal played a phenomenal game and very much back and forth. UConn able to put some things together in the last couple of minutes to eventually pull away from Southern Cal, outscoring them 25-22 in that final quarter. But regardless, very good game. And again, overall, just a very fun and very entertaining night of women's college basketball, setting the table for what is going to be a very fun and very exciting Final Four coming up this weekend in Cleveland that I'm excited for. We're against South Carolina, against NC State, kind of the unknown of this entire tournament, or not the unknown of this entire tournament, but out of all the teams in the Final Four, the one that people aren't going to be talking about as much, one that's going to be kind of flying under the radar. But make no mistake, that's a very good NC State team that South Carolina will have to give its full attention to. Then on the other side, you're going to have UConn and Iowa, two of the premier powers of women's college basketball, going head-to-head to decide that other slot in the national championship game, which obviously will continue to break that down more and more as the week goes along. Our guy, Elijah Campbell, is going to be up there in Cleveland this upcoming weekend, breaking things down and giving us his perspective and insight from up there, getting set for the Final Four and the national championship game. I'll remind you, as always, you can watch and listen to us in a variety of ways here on The Game. There's always The Game TV, sponsored by our friends at Shepherd's Glass. Go to youtube.com, search The Game TV, and you can stream us all day long on all of our shows here on YouTube. And then you can also listen to us on the 107.5 The Game app. Just go to the App Store, whether it be iTunes, the Google Play Store. Give us a download, take us with you wherever you go, across the state, across the country, across the world. You can listen to The Game wherever you want to. We'll hear some sound from some of the key players last night in the Women's Elite Eight action, coaches and players alike, and start setting the table for the Final Four coming up at the end of this week. It is The Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you, Captain Dave producing on the other side of the glass on your Tuesday morning here on The Game. It is a beautiful day here in Columbia. It looks like the high is going to be around 80, 84 degrees. But looking ahead, there is going to be some rain in the forecast a little bit later on in the week and coming in to next week as well. And whenever you have rain, you always need to be aware of what's going on with your crawl space, because if you have an open crawl space and recently experienced a storm, you might have standing water under your home. High humidity and condensation in your crawl space creates an environment for mold, mildew, and pests, including things like termites. That moisture can also lead to wood rot and floor joist problems, and those smells and awful odors from mold and mildew in your crawl space can cause health issues for you and your family, like runny nose, itchy eyes, and coughs, because up to half the air that you breathe in your home comes from your crawl space. If you're having any issues with your crawl space, you need to check out our friends at Canty Foundation Specialist. Go online to cantycanfixit.com, and they'll send a professional out there to evaluate your home's crawl space and get you and your family fixed up so you can live comfortably. Again, Canty Foundation Specialist, cantycanfixit.com. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you, Cap and Dave, producing on the other side of the glass as we react to what we saw last night in women's basketball action as the Final Four field is set. Carolina taking on NC State on Friday night, and then Iowa and UConn squaring off in the second game to decide which two teams will play for the national championship coming up on Sunday. Speaking of Friday, by the way, you can golf with the game this Friday at our annual spring golf tournament. It's April the 5th. Again, this Friday out at Charwood Golf Club in West Columbia. If you want to take part in it, there's still time for you to register. It's $400 for a foursome, $200 for a pair. Going to have a 10 a.m. shotgun start. Going to be having giveaways, things like USC baseball tickets, Carowin tickets, concert tickets. Also going to have the craft beer passport as well. If you want to take part, still some time. Give Charwood a call. 803-755-2000. Again, 803-755-2000 to register for our annual spring golf tournament this Friday. Looking back to last night, again, LSU ends up coming on the losing end of things as, you know, this was a rematch of last year's national championship game where LSU, I'd say, handily defeated Iowa in that one. Not quite the case last night. And, of course, so much of that had to do with the play of Caitlyn Clark. And let's go with cut number 8 here, Dave. Here's Kim Mulkey talking about just how darn hard it is to guard Caitlyn Clark.
Well, there's not a whole lot of strategy. You got to guard her. Nobody else seems to be able to guard her. We didn't even guard her last year when we beat them. She's just a generational player, and she just makes everybody around her better. That's what the great ones do. I think they had a kid that scored 21 and 18. She had 12 assists. Caitlyn Clark's not going to beat you by herself. It's what she does to make those other teammates better that helps her score points and them score points to beat you. What did I say to her? I said, I sure am glad you leaving. I said, girl, you something else. Never seen anything like it.
She's definitely a classic example of she's going to get hers regardless. You just got to make sure that she takes a lot of shots to get there. And when you look back to, you know, last year's national championship game, she scored 30 points, but she was at 40% shooting from the field, which for a lot of players, that's fantastic. But for Caitlyn Clark standards, that's not always up to par with how well she shoots. So, again, she took a lot of shots last year, didn't get as many of them to fall. And, you know, last night was obviously a much, much different story as she was 13 of 29 from the field, 44% for her 41 points, and, of course, 9 of 20 from 3. And again, LSU just didn't have an answer. LSU couldn't guard her. And, again, when you're pulling up from 27, 28 feet out, especially in a game like, you know, women's basketball where you don't see that as prevalently, it's hard to defend those kind of things. And that's what makes her so good, and that's what makes Iowa such a hard team to beat. And, again, they got their revenge last night on, you know, on LSU from last year's national championship game. So that's another box for Caitlyn Clark to check off. And, again, the one thing that's remaining for her is trying to get the national championship and bring that home. And, again, South Carolina likely could be the team standing in the way of that coming up on Sunday. But on the other side of the coin for that matchup on Friday night, you have UConn. And UConn, I don't want to say has been flying under the radar, but just, I mean, really nobody's talking about him. We brought up the point about South Carolina flying under the radar to the point of yesterday of, you know, Dawn Staley talking about it to the point where they're just kind of handling business and winning games. You know, maybe like the game against Indiana, some tighter than usual, but still winning. And UConn is very much in the same way, I feel like, where they are just winning, as they always do. And you look up and, oh, they're in the Final Four, as you would expect them to be, and as Gino Auriemma has brought them to many, many times before. But this year's obviously different because you have Paige Beckers back. Her knee injury last year kept her out for most of the season. And, you know, I don't think it's any coincidence that UConn didn't make past the Sweet 16 last year. Now you have your best player back, one of the best players in the country, and guess what? They're back in the Final Four once again. We're going to go with cut number 12 here, Dave. Here is Gino Auriemma, head coach of UConn, talking about last night's performance from Paige Bueckers.
Paige always wants to be superhuman, and you can't aspire to be that, but she tries her damnness to be superhuman. Today she was playing against somebody that plays like they're superhuman, you know. I think that was probably the toughest matchup that any of those guards had throughout the entire season. Maybe since they've gotten to Connecticut, you know. I think Juju's probably, you know, as difficult a matchup as there is or has been for our players. But for Paige, it's, you know, this is what I live for. I live for these moments, and I think she almost looks at it as they have to guard me too. I'm a tough matchup for them, and she always tries to make it our team against their team. But I do know that she's pretty proudful of, you know, she was pointing to her 10 rebounds. And I pointed to Juju's 10 rebounds. And, you know, she had an excuse why, you know, Juju got 10, you know, like, or why she didn't get 15. She said she was busy locking up somebody, she didn't get 15. So when you have players that think like there's nothing I can't do and there's nothing that escapes me, they're just on another level. They play the game on another level. They think it on a different level, and they inspire everybody around them. So yeah, today was Paige doing Paige things.
Yeah, to say the least. Her final stats from last night: 28 points, 11 of 23 from the field, grabbed those 10 rebounds, also had 6 assists as well, and again, never left the court. She played all 40 minutes last night, and that's become, you know, what UConn's had to do this season is, you know, Paige Bueckers was injured a season ago, and this year they've had a litany of injuries. You know, go back to when South Carolina played them earlier on in the, you know, earlier on in the year. And we talked about that going in, where they were banged up in a lot of areas and haven't been able to rely on as many girls coming off the bench. And last night was no different. And you know, with only, you know, Samuels and Brady coming off the bench last night for 14 and 18 minutes, they've had to rely on their key players like Bueckers and like Edwards to stay out there pretty much the entire game. And again, Bueckers goes out there and puts up another great performance for 28 points. And you know, she's obviously been around for a while, and you know, so much of the hype is going to be around Caitlyn Clark going into this game on Friday night, but don't sleep on Paige Bueckers. I'm very excited to get this matchup between two of the best in the business in women's college basketball, you know, getting this chance to go head-to-head with the spot in the, you know, in the national championship on the line. And again, that is, you know, a box that they're both trying to check here, of you know, finally achieving that mountaintop, and you know, they got to go through each other to you know, to ultimately get there. So that's gonna be a fun one. Hopefully South Carolina can lock up their spot in the first game against North Carolina State, to where you can kind of sit back a little bit more comfortably and enjoy the nightcap that is going to be Iowa and UConn. But should be a fun time out there in Cleveland. Again, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, that our guy Elijah Campbell is going to be out there this weekend, giving us a lot of insight and checking in over the course of a couple days out there. As again, hopefully we're talking about this time next week, South Carolina winning yet another national championship under Dawn Staley. But it's certainly not going to be easy. Got to go through a couple of good teams to obviously be able to pull that off. So we'll continue talking about women's basketball, including a new feature coming up next. Going to highlight some maybe under the radar performances from last night's games. That's coming up. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you, Captain Dave, producing on the other side of the glass on your Tuesday, on a beautiful day here in Columbia on the Game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head with you on your Tuesday morning. And it is time for a new segment here on the Extra Point. Who did the heavy lifting? Sponsored by our friends over at TEC Equipment Rental. And through the first 30 minutes of the show, I've talked plenty about Caitlyn Clark, and rightfully so. 41-point performance last night is what really grabs the headlines. But I want to go back to something that Kim Mulkey said, that I played for you a few minutes ago, where she said Caitlyn Clark makes the other players around her better. And that's absolutely the truth, because the person that I feel like really did the heavy lifting last night outside of Caitlyn Clark's performance was her teammate in Kate Martin. Kate got 21 points and grabbed 6 rebounds in 39 minutes of action herself, went 8 of 16 shooting from the field. But it's where she got those points that really sticks out to me, because this was a game that, and look, we know Iowa's game is very much perimeter based, where they shoot a lot from the outside, mainly revolving around Caitlyn Clark. They can get down into the paint, but that is not what they thrive at necessarily. And going up against a team in LSU that is a dominant force in the paint themselves, LSU grabbed 54 rebounds in this game last night. 54 rebounds. That is a darn good paint presence. Kate Martin really made things happen in the paint last night, where she had 21 points, 16 of those coming in the second half. And looking at her shot chart, just about, I mean, she had the 1-3 from the outside, but just about everything else was down. 6 of her 8 shots were down there near the basket. And again, to be able to do that against a team like LSU that is a lot more of a physical presence down there under the hoop, I think goes a long way. And this is a game where, when you look at the final box score, LSU still won the paint battle 44-36, but every one of those points count, obviously. And again, it's great when you have a team like Caitlyn Clark being able to shoot on the outside, but you got to have some kind of presence down there in the paint, getting physical. And I thought Kate Martin did a good job of that last night. So that is kind of an under the radar stat in looking at this victory for Iowa last night. So I definitely feel like Kate Martin did some of the heavy lifting last night for that Iowa Hawkeyes team. On the flip side of things, going back to LSU now, I mentioned those 54 rebounds. Angel Reese grabbed 20 of those on what was likely not 100% healthy ankle, which is something that we've seen her be bothered by a lot this season. Came down on it funny in the first half of last night's game, sat on the bench for a moment, and I think even coming out of the locker room at halftime, Mulkey was even seen asking, I think Holly Rowe talked about this, that was just asking Angel Reese, like, are you okay? Are you 100%? And she likely wasn't, but still went out there, gave it her best effort, grabbed 20 rebounds. As I mentioned, her shooting was pretty off in the second half, only going 1 of 10, but still managed to grab 12 rebounds in that second half alone. So she was going out there, making her presence known to her best abilities, even though she was a little bit limited. I want to go to cut number 7 here, Dave. Here is Angel Reese talking about the journey that this season has been for her and this LSU team.
Yeah, we've seen everything this year. We have been through so much adversity, so I'm more than proud of this team. We don't have that much depth. We had some injuries, I took some time away from the team. So many things happened this year, and so many things hit us, and we never folded. And just being able to come out tonight and give our all for 40 minutes, we came up short, but we have to keep our heads high.
And you can hear the emotion in her voice, and rightfully so. Obviously, tough loss, and likely the end of her college career. I know she mentioned after the game she's going to take some time and ultimately decide what she's going to do. But you look at these WNBA mock drafts, and she's projected very highly, if not towards the top in most of them. And, she's had a great college career herself, obviously won the national championship a season ago, and has accomplished a lot, but not going to be able to get back there this year. And, she's definitely been one of the more polarizing figures in women's college basketball these past couple of years in both good ways and bad ways. She's somebody that has garnered certainly a lot of negative attention, but you can't deny how great of a player she is and what kind of role she's played in women's college basketball these past couple seasons. So she's obviously going to be likely, again, going to be moving on to the WNBA. So that's the last of we probably saw of her in a college uniform last night. On the flip side of things, going over to the other game between UConn and Southern Cal, we saw just the beginning of what is one of the next superstars. She kind of already is a superstar, but one of the ones to be carrying this game of women's college basketball for the next couple of years, that being Juju Watkins of Southern Cal, who, again, they come up a little bit short to UConn last night in the Elite Eight, but Juju Watkins went out there and she showed out. 29 points, 9 of 25 from the field, and grabbed 10 rebounds herself. Again, there was kind of that back and forth dynamic between her and Paige Beckers. Obviously, Beckers ends up getting the better of her, and UConn goes on to win. But when we're talking about kind of this shift as we get to the end of this season, where you're going to be losing Clark, you're going to be losing Reese, you're going to be losing Cardoso, some of these big names from this year and the past couple of years, Juju Watkins is aligning herself to maybe be that biggest name in women's college basketball going into next year and the year after that. And again, as I brought up a little bit earlier, I feel like Southern Cal is a team that not a lot of people have gotten to see. For one, they're playing on the West Coast, and a lot of those games tipped off really late or were on nights where maybe you weren't thinking about watching women's college basketball, to where maybe you heard about Juju Watkins and maybe saw some highlights. But I think for a lot of people who maybe have not even been paying as much attention to them in the NCAA tournament so far, last night was truly a grand stage for Juju Watkins to show what she was capable of and what she was made of. And I think she went out there and did that. Again, took a lot of shots, 25, only hit on 9 of them, but again, still ends up leading her team and scoring 29 points. And it's one of those things that, and she was very emotional after the game, speaking as well on what this season has meant and what this opportunity to get to play this deep into the tournament has meant for her and her team. But there's no doubt they're going to be back. There's no doubt that they're going to be among one of the favorites to win the national championship going into, going into next year, and rightfully so. And they're going to, rely so much on what Juju Watkins is able to do. And she's been a fun player to watch in her true freshman season. And I'm very interested and very excited to see what the rest of her college career is going to look like. So it's a tough pill to swallow for them right now, only being some 12 hours removed, not even 12 hours removed from, getting bounced in the Elite Eight. But this is just the beginning for what I believe Juju Watkins and Southern Cal are going to be able to do over these next couple seasons. And I'm sure it's a team that South Carolina is going to see at some point. And, containing a great player like that is certainly, certainly not going to be easy. Want to remind you once again, let you know, in reference to the Final Four, coming up later on this week, we're going to have Carolina versus NC State here on the game with pregame coverage starting at 6:30 for a 7 o'clock tip. Baseball also in action on Friday night. First pitch at 7 o'clock at Founders Park against Texas A&M. Pregame coverage for that will start on our sister station, ESPN 1320 WISW, as the women's game will be on the game this weekend. And if they end up playing on Sunday, we'll get you, or they'll also be here on the game. But for Friday night, you're going to have the women on the game, and then you're going to have baseball on our sister station, ESPN 1320 WISW. It's going to be a busy weekend for sure across those couple of Gamecock sports. We'll come back and wrap up the hour and get to some of your thoughts on the Love Chevrolet phone line. See, Gamecock Larry holding on has been waiting to break down this Final Four this upcoming weekend. We'll hear from him as we wrap up hour number 1 of the Extra Point on your Tuesday morning. Tyler Head and Captain Dave here on the game. Welcome back in. Extra Point, Tyler Head, Cap and Dave with you on this Tuesday. We're getting into some spring football conversation coming up in hour number 2. Reminder, as always, on Tuesday during the spring, Coach Beamer's presser coming up at 12:30. Hear from him and his latest thoughts as we are right at just under 3 weeks away from the spring game. So a couple more weeks and a couple more sessions of spring practice rolling on, and be interesting to hear, what Beamer's latest thoughts and observations are from what he sees out there at spring practice. But continuing on our conversation about everything going on with the women and the Final Four coming up this weekend, Gamecock Larry on Love Chevrolet phone lines. Gamecock Larry, appreciate your call. What's on your mind this morning?
I tell you what, this Raiders basketball team got the old Gamecock. Oh, I'm telling you, my blood pressure been high. Good Lord. But we still in there. They scare me, but I'm still pulling for them. Take care of North Carolina State this weekend. I think it's Thursday night. Then we'll wait on Caitlyn Clark or old Gino. And I'll tell you what, everybody, I've talked to quite a few people, they say they want Gino. But you know what? I want Caitlyn Clark in Connecticut and Caitlyn Clark at Iowa. We gonna have to stop her. Well, you can't stop her. She's gonna get a few points, but I don't believe she'll get as many against us this year as she got last year. I believe we're gonna put full Wally on her, and full Wally with them quick hands and fast feet. I think she's gonna slow her down and cause quite a few turnovers. That's about all I got to say. But the old man, I don't know. I'll just be glad when it's over. Because, man, I done aged about 10 years in the last 2 games we had. That's all I got to say. I really appreciate 107.5, Captain Dave, Tyler, all of them, and all Gamecock Nation. Old Gamecock Larry's still sticking in there. Still kicking and crowing, but ain't kicking quite as high, crowing quite as loud. But he's doing okay. Go Gamecock.
Appreciate it as always, Gamecock Larry, and quick programming note: Final Four games coming up on Friday night, not Thursday. So want to make sure you're tuning in at the right time. So quickly there, Gamecock Larry mentioned wanting to see Iowa in the national championship game, and going back to our Twitter poll from yesterday, Iowa wins out 37% out of the 4 teams that were remaining going into last night's game of teams that you wanted to see South Carolina face in the national championship. Let's hit one more call right here. James also wants to weigh in on the women's Final Four. James, what's on your mind this morning?
Well, it's curious. I don't know how they arrange the teams, or if they look ahead to say, all right, this could potentially be a matchup between these 2 teams. But it's odd the path that Carolina had to get to the championship or the Final Four, and you look at the other side of the bracket, how stacked it was with the big names, Iowa, UConn. It's odd how they did that, to think of what Carolina had to go through or will go through to get to the championship game. Personally, they are a wrecking machine. I don't see how anybody's going to stop them. But what are your thoughts on how they arrange that?
Yeah, so, and I personally believe that, because again, ESPN is obviously the one that shows the women's national championship game. I do believe that their hope at the end of the day was that we would see South Carolina and Iowa face off for the national championship, and we're 1 game away from both those teams, winning, and that being the case. Now, and Iowa, the players on Iowa and LSU were mentioning it last night after the game that obviously they did have a tough road to hoe to get to the point of being in the Final Four, but I feel like that's, there's always going to be a tougher side of the bracket, and theoretically speaking, South Carolina being the top overall seed should technically have the easier route if we're being, specific here, which there's no easy route. You're obviously going to have tough teams no matter what side of the bracket you were on, and, obviously Carolina ran into some interesting games against the likes of Indiana and Oregon State, but definitely not quite as tough of a side of the bracket as what Iowa and LSU were dealing with. But again, I feel like that's the benefit that you should have as the top overall seed.
No, and I understand that. It's kind of like, hey, you earn the right through the regular season to kind of have an easier path. And the last thing I'll say is what Dawn Staley has done is, to me, unparalleled. How quickly she assembled teams that just, it's kind of like what Gino Auriemma did, and just making it where it's like, all right, we're at the top of the mountain, come knock us off. But my only complaint, this may sound weird, I wish she would wear something Gamecock oriented when she's on the big stage to represent the school. It's like if she walked off the court, you'd have no idea that she's the head coach of the Gamecocks, and that's disappointing. But other than that, we'll see. Thanks for the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate your call there, James. 803-404-6100. Love Chevrolet phone lines as well as the Firehouse Subs text line. You know, that's something I hear a lot of people bring up about Dawn, is that she likes her interesting outfits and, her Gucci and Louis Vuitton and stuff like that, and doesn't always wear something that is representing, of the school. And if this was a program that hadn't won 2 national championships in the past 7 years, I maybe would have more thoughts on that, but my thought process on that is, if you're as successful as Dawn Staley is, she can wear whatever she wants as long as she continues to win and continues to put this team in the Final Four playing for national championships. I'm all good with it. But if you have a different thought, I completely understand. More conversation as the day goes along about not only the women's Final Four, but the men's Final Four, as that kind of took a back seat, last night with the women, being in action, finalizing who their Final Four teams are going to be. But plenty of conversation about the men's Final Four coming up as well. Jump into some spring football coming up next, as we're in week number 4 here of spring football for South Carolina, getting it closer and closer to the spring game coming up on April the 20th. That's all coming up. Hour number 2, Tyler Head along with you, Captain Dave producing on the other side of the glass on your Tuesday morning here on The Game. seeing who's going to claim that national championship. But want to talk a little bit of spring football as we're right here now at 10 o'clock. So practice number 6 currently underway for the Gamecocks as they make their way through spring practice. Right about halfway through, again, getting closer and closer to the spring game coming up here in just a couple weeks on April the 20th. And coming up today at 12:30 during the halftime show, we'll have Coach Beamer's live presser as he reflects on another week of spring practice, what he's seen so far, what he likes, what he dislikes, and, where things stand as of right now as we continue to answer a lot of questions about this team. And that's what makes this spring so interesting for me, is that and this is kind of the case a lot of times with the spring, but going into it with more questions than answers. And likely going to come out of it with still more questions than answers, if we're being honest, because of how much has changed with this team since the season ended for them back in November. And especially when we're talking about the offense and how many new faces, new starters, new roles are being taken on for the offensive side of the ball. And again, those are things that I still feel like we're not going to truly know about until we get into games being played this fall. One area that we might be able to glean a little bit from by the time spring concludes is the offensive line. And look, everything lives and dies by what goes on in the trenches. And we learned that quite a bit last year with the offensive line struggling, with the defensive line struggling at times to be able to stop the run, things like that, where if the front line of your offense or defense is not performing well, you're going to have a really tough time with everything else falling back in place. And I feel like offensive line is going to be one of the dominant stories through the rest of spring practice as well as through summer until we get to that first game against Old Dominion. And even then, if, once you start SEC play the next week against Kentucky, if it's not up to snuff for what you want it to be, then it could be something that persists for the entire season like it did a season ago. And again, when you're talking about the offensive line, it held the team back in a lot of ways to where Spencer Rattler was running for his life. We talked about that game against North Carolina in week number 1 and how tough that was. Now he made, chicken salad out of chicken you-know-what the best he could in a lot of those games. But, man, if he would have had better blocking up front, who knows what this team could have accomplished on offense, not only with Rattler throwing the ball, but also being able to run the ball a little bit more effectively. Mario Anderson put up a couple of 100-yard performances, but, man, how many of those did he have to break off like the one huge long run and then just kind of have middling success for the rest of the game? So that's an area that this team drastically needs improvement on going into this year. And I give credit to Coach Beamer and his staff for really addressing that this offseason, through both recruiting and the transfer portal. Now, a lot of the issue with the offensive line last year stemmed from injuries and stemmed from the fact that you couldn't keep a healthy rotation of 5 guys on the field 2 weeks in a row until the very end of the season. And I don't care how talented your offensive line is, that if you have a group of 5 guys that aren't used to playing together, it's not going to be as effective as a group of guys that may not be quite as talented that have 20 starts combined they have 20 starts together as a unit, as that front 5. So knock on wood, hopefully we're not dealing with those same issues this year for South Carolina, which the law of averages says you probably shouldn't, but you never know. Football's a funny game like that. This year is going to be interesting for sure. And reading on Gamecock Central the other day, our guy Mike Yuva wrote an interesting article talking about Vershawn Lee. And he was talking about it from the perspective of Sean Lee and how impressed Vershawn Lee and how impressed he's been so far with the other guys coming into the offensive line room. But I think it's even more important to point out how important Rashawn Lee is going to be in this offensive line and how it ends up shaking out through the spring, summer, into the fall. Obviously, he's a veteran presence in that room. He's been around here for a while, started a lot of games, but his versatility, I think, is truly the most important key factor in what he brings to the table for this offense and for this offensive line. Because here's a guy that is, so far this spring, getting reps at center. And Wes Mitchell on Gamecock Central noted the other day that what they deemed to be the first team, he was getting reps at center in both those snaps that media was able to see. Now, ideally, he's there all season. Ideally, you don't get into a situation where you have to move him around, that he can stay at what is I don't even say a natural position for him, but his better spot at center, being the anchor of that offensive line, having a senior guy that has been around for this program for a long time, being at the center of your offensive line, touching the ball every single play is an ideal scenario. However, if like last season, injuries start to creep their ugly head or performance of other guys on the offensive line isn't where it needs to be, you have the option to move Rashawn Lee around. And no matter where you move him, you don't have to worry about him. That is one guy on the offensive line that's going to be good, no matter where you seem to put him. And he proved that a season ago. He played at tackle. He played at guard. And I know it's easy to look at it from a 10,000-foot view and say, well, everybody's blocking. Everybody's doing kind of the same thing on the offensive line. Why is it special for a guy like that to be able to move around? Because every spot's different. The assignment of every spot's different. The way you block on every spot on the offensive line is different. And the versatility of Rashawn Lee certainly goes a long way. And now, again, hopefully you don't have to move him around. Hopefully you have a good, competent group of 4 other guys around him, 2 on either side, to where it can stay status quo and everybody can stay healthy and you can have the same 5 for the entire season, which, again, I think would help this team tremendously as a whole. Now, looking at the offensive line of what we know so far through spring, again, going back to the limited amount of reps that media has been able to see, the front of the offensive line so far has been Ja'Kai Moore at the left tackle spot, Kamar Bell at right guard, Rashawn Lee at center, as I mentioned, Kamar Bell at left guard, Trevon Ball at right guard, and then Kason Henry at the right tackle spot. Now, this isn't set in stone, and again, media only gets to see a small portion of what actually happens in practice, but from what they deem to be first-team reps, these were the guys that were on the front 5 the other day. And now, if this ended up being your starting offensive line, it wouldn't be shocking necessarily, because you can make a case for all these guys and why they are maybe seen as the ones as of right now. Now, again, you're going to start jumping up and down and saying, well, what about, Tree? What about Josiah Thompson? What about Cam Pringle? I get it. Again, they've got 16 scholarship guys in this offensive line room, and they're working through figuring out who the best starting 5 are. But, again, just kind of looking at this 5 that's been presented to us, again, I could see it happening. Obviously, Ja'Kai Moore offers versatility. His production not quite as high as somebody like Rashawn Lee, but he's somebody that has the ability to move around. And, we'll see how he would fare at a theoretical left tackle spot if that's what they ultimately decided to do. And, it's a spot with a lot of experience for him, who's been around for a while. What kind of development can he have through this spring, through this summer, and how much better can he get when the fall rolls around, I think is the biggest question, the biggest question here. For Kamar Bell, again, somebody that we haven't talked about as much on the offensive line, brings in a lot of experience from FAU, and that's extremely valuable. Good, decent numbers there when you look at Pro Football Focus and all that kind of stuff for how he did with blocking and pass protection. And maybe he's your answer at right guard, left guard. Trevon Ball, who, of course, came in as a true freshman a season ago, got 8 starts at right guard, kind of baptism by fire. Due to the injuries, he and Sri Babalati got kind of thrown out there to the Wolves. And while it's one of those things that when it's happening in the freshman season, you're saying, oh, man, I wish we didn't have to play these freshman guys who, not that they weren't ready, but it's still always going to be a tough jump going from playing in high school to playing in the SEC and, dealing with that. But now as you get into the spring and as we go into his second year, we're saying, well, I'm glad he got that valuable experience because that puts him so much farther ahead as opposed to if he was just coming in garbage time or just playing a limited amount of snaps a season ago. And how much did that help him in his development going into the spring? Probably a lot. And then Caitlyn Henry on the end of the line, somebody that when I was doing the In the Bonus show with Colin Taylor a season ago, he was the president of the Caitlyn Henry fan club and paraded for him to be the starter at right tackle. Well, guess what? 4 snaps into game number 1, he went down with an injury. Tried to come back later on in the season, just wasn't quite where they needed to be from a health standpoint. And last year, kind of a lost year for Caitlyn Henry. But again, a lot of people, including Colin Taylor, very high on him for a reason. He obviously has the skills and the ability to be a starter as he was in game number 1. If he can stay healthy through spring, summer, and into fall, he might be that guy to occupy the right tackle spot. And again, when media goes out there and views practice to another time this week or next week or whenever it is, it may be a completely different starting 5. And again, you got bodies in the room. You got a lot of options. And I hope to see them go through different options and different combinations to figure out what the right one is. And hopefully we're talking about a great offensive line when this fall rolls around. But I can tell you one thing, if they can't figure it out or if the offensive line isn't any better than they were a season ago, Carolina's going to have a tough time getting to a bowl game. And as we've talked about plenty, that's the minimum expectation this season. I know that schedule's hard, but you can't go 2 years without going to a bowl game. That is when we get into the unacceptable territory. So we'll see what the starting 5 ends up shaking out to be and how that affects everything, at the end of the day. Baseball in action coming up tomorrow night, taking on Georgia Southern. Another chance for you to win a lot of money thanks to our friends over at Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union and their Grand Slam giveaway. Every game, $25 gets added to the pot. If a Gamecock hitter rips a Grand Slam homer, you could win cash thanks to our friends at Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union. The pot is currently at $700. Shout on over to 1075thegame.com each and every week. If you haven't done it this week, go ahead. Because win a Gamecock hitter. It's going to happen at some point this year. I'm confident in it. When a Gamecock hitter finally blasts a Grand Slam, you could be the lucky recipient of all that money in the pot. And if it doesn't happen tomorrow night, guess what? It rolls over $25 more going into this weekend series against Texas A&M. So, again, head on over to 1075thegame.com and register for your chance to win the Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway. Talk a little bit of men's basketball coming up next. Paul Feinbaum had some interesting thoughts on the perception of the SEC in this year's NCAA tournament with Alabama making the Final Four. We'll hit that coming up. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Tuesday morning on The Game. Of course, women's basketball Final Four coming up this weekend, as we've been talking about a lot this morning. Men's Final Four also in action. The first two games coming up on Saturday, then the national championship going to take place next Monday night. Why we play national championships on Monday night, I don't know, but that's a different conversation for a different day. One of the teams that's going to be in that Final Four for the first time is the University of Alabama, led by head coach Nate Oates. Now, let me ask you this question. Are you a pro SEC type of person? Do you kind of wrap your pride a little bit in the conference itself? Do you care about what the perception of the conference is? Do you boast about national championships that maybe your team didn't necessarily win? And I ask this because a lot of people do this. A lot of people kind of tie themselves to the SEC in general. You root for a team, obviously, but are very much caught up in what people think of the SEC and its perception from a national standpoint. Always wanted to be the strongest, the best, and the toughest conference, no matter what the what sport is. And I'd say the SEC is always aware of its image more than any other conference. And that was a big point of conversation when March Madness began a couple weeks ago, with the SEC maybe getting off to a rougher start than people expected. Now, all that being said, you still had two teams in Alabama and Tennessee playing in the Elite Eight this past weekend. Obviously, Alabama picks up the win and gets to the Final Four. Tennessee falls to Purdue and comes up just short once again of making the Final Four. But still, you have SEC making up 25% of your Final Four field, which is a lot more than some other conferences can obviously say. Paul Feinbaum yesterday was on our sister station, Jocks FM, out there in Birmingham, and was posed the question by Cole Kubelik and Greg McElroy on if Bama making the Final Four erases what has been maybe not the best March for the SEC. Cut number 5 here, Dave. Here's what he had to say.
100%. And when we talked about this last week, I felt like it was a predictable fake outrage by the media when they were lampooning Commissioner Sankey and others for, well, here's another bust in March. It wasn't. You have two teams in the Elite Eight. That's pretty remarkable. And what we have tended to grade programs and conferences on in basketball is how they do in the tournament, and ultimately, do you get to the Final Four and or win a championship? And in many ways, for most programs, getting to the Final Four is the ultimate cherry on top of the cake, because and I think in Alabama's case it will be too. Listen, everyone knows what the line is going into Saturday night. Everyone will predict UConn, and that's fine. And I probably would agree with that. But a lot of people, if not almost everyone, predicted North Carolina too the other night, and all the other upsets that did or didn't happen. So I think for the SEC, Tennessee getting there would have slammed the door, but everybody's got one in there. The ACC made a terrific run, and they got one. The SEC has one. If you're represented, you matter, and that's why this debate about John Calipari a week ago, seems so difficult for him, because he hasn't been to a Final Four since 2015, and since then within the league. I mean, you've seen Frank Martin in South Carolina, and obviously Bruce Pearl, and now Nate Oates, and that's how the game of college basketball is framed once we move on from next weekend.
I'm gonna slightly disagree with Paul Feinbaum there, because I don't think Alabama making the Final Four completely erases everything else that's gone on with the SEC in this month of March, and what was seen by underwhelming by a lot of people. Again, outside of what Alabama and Tennessee were able to do, and I think if anything, Tennessee and Bama making deep runs just maybe kind of cancels things out to a degree, if that makes sense. Now, in assessing the teams that made the NCAA tournament out of the SEC, 8 in total, ultimately, Mississippi State, South Carolina, Florida and A&M getting bounced early. All those teams, or the first three of those, exited in round number 1. A&M exited in round number 2. I don't think those teams losing early really hurts the perception of the SEC at all. I think it's all reliant on what your truly strong, super powerful teams do at the end of the day. Teams that have a legitimate shot of going deep, making a Final Four type of run, and going into the NCAA tournament. Those 4 teams out of the SEC were Alabama, Tennessee, Auburn, and Kentucky. All those teams had a good shot at making serious noise and being contenders for the national championship. 2 of them obviously ended up going pretty deep, with Bama now in the Final Four, Tennessee getting bounced in the Elite 8. The other 2 of those did not make it out of the first round, with Auburn losing to Yale and Kentucky losing to Oakland. 2 inexcusable losses, I'd say. Now, again, when you talk about the Oakland Golden Grizzlies team, they, led by their superstar, shooter, Jack Golke, they had a great night, obviously. And that being said, though, when you look at it on paper, Kentucky should have won. Similarly to with Auburn and Yale. Now, I think we're all under the assumption that Auburn did not take Yale as seriously as they should have, and they should have beat them by 20 to 25 points. That obviously did not end up happening. But I think that's more glaring on the conference as a whole, with those 2 teams losing in the way that they did, as opposed to the other 4 losing, as lower seeds in the SEC. So it's great for Alabama to make the Final Four, and it's obviously great for the program, great for Nate Oates, all that kind of stuff. But I don't think it suddenly saves the SEC in the national in national perception, because you had 2 of your other strong, viable options to maybe be in the mix for a Final Four, not even get out of the first round. And I think that's inexcusable to a degree. All that being said, again, the SEC is probably the lone conference that cares as much about its perception than anybody else. And again, I think it's just kind of a mixed bag this year, where you had 2 teams that lived up to what people thought they were going to do, and 2 teams that didn't. And look, if Mississippi State or Carolina or Florida or A&M were able to go on deep runs, that would have added to the prestige of the SEC, certainly. But them losing, again, I don't think that really takes away from anything, because they weren't expected to really go that deep in the first place. So I don't know. It's an interesting conversation to have, regardless. But I'm going to disagree with Paul Feinbaum just a little bit on that. If you haven't heard, our craft beer passport is back. Craft beer card, is back. You can spend $30 at a brewery at 12 craft beer locations. It is a $360 value, all yours for just $79. To get a craft beer card, just go online to 1075thegame.com. Click on our Sweet Deals tab and purchase it there. And again, you can use it at multiple breweries around the Columbia area. Very good value. Again, $79 for a $360 value. Keep it on conversation about the men's tournament. Given that it is WrestleMania weekend as well, I was wondering, who are the heels and who are the faces going into the final weekend of college basketball? We'll discuss that coming up next. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you, Captain Dave, producing on the other side of the glass here on The Game. Welcome back into the Extra Point. Tyler Head with you on your Tuesday morning. So we now know the field for both the men and women's Final Four coming up this weekend. Women's Final Four gets rolling on Friday up there in Cleveland. Men get rolling on Saturday out there in Phoenix. Of course, last time the Final Four was in Phoenix. South Carolina was part of it. Unfortunately, not this time around. But it is an interesting group of teams that you have heading out to the Final Four this upcoming weekend for both the men and women's side. But I'll start off with the men, where you have Alabama, you have UConn, you have Purdue, and you have NC State. And given that this weekend is also WrestleMania weekend out in Philadelphia, it posed an interesting question in my mind in regards to these Final Four fields. Because wrestling is the ultimate good guy versus bad guy story, right? You have to have some good guys. You have to have some bad guys. That's what creates the compelling product where you want to see one guy win or you want to see one guy lose, depending on which side of the aisle that they're on. And I feel like sports are very much in the same way. And sports are more compelling when you have somebody to cheer for, when you have somebody to cheer against. And especially in a situation like this where South Carolina is no longer playing in the NCAA tournament field. You want to latch on to a team to cheer for, or you want to go against a team that you may dislike. So how does it end up working out? Who are the heels and who are the faces? And for those that are not familiar, heel is what is commonly referred to as a bad guy in professional wrestling. A face is what is referred to as a good guy. So who are the heels and who are the faces going into the Final Four this upcoming weekend? I think you got to start off with the easiest one, being NC State, being the ultimate baby face. Everybody is loving on NC State right now. They are the miracle team that had their backs completely up against the wall at the beginning of the ACC tournament and went on this remarkable run that, regardless of what happens this weekend, is going to go down as one of the greatest things in North Carolina State sports history, to be able to make this run and catch fire at the right time through the ACC tournament and the NCAA tournament to make it to their first Final Four in roughly 40 years. So they are unequivocally, in my mind, the mega baby face going into this weekend because nobody expected them to be there. They were an 11 seed. And it's one of those things that I personally felt like, yeah, okay, they won the ACC tournament. That's cool. I even had them winning in the first round of the NCAA tournament against Texas Tech, but this very much struck me as a team that, okay, they're going to win a game, maybe two, and they get bounced. We're going to give them their nice standing ovation. They're going to walk off the court, and it was a fun story, but thanks for coming. And they have exceeded expectations at every turn since then and are now playing in the Final Four. DJ Burns is America's most beloved player in this tournament. Just a big guy that likes to have fun, always smiling, just enjoying himself playing the game of basketball. And you love to see that. It is very hard, unless you are one of the other fan bases up there in Tobacco Road, it is very hard to hate NC State going into this tournament, which is why I think they're the mega baby face going into this weekend. Purdue's an interesting one to me because I'm not entirely sure how to place them. Now, they're routinely one of the best programs in college basketball in the country on a pretty consistent basis. Matt Painter as a head coach is somebody that I'd say is pretty inconspicuous outside of the Big Ten, where unless you're a fan of Indiana or another rival school up there, you probably don't hate the guy. And he's obviously a very good basketball coach, but doesn't really seem to rub people the wrong way or anything like that. Just kind of goes about his business as head coach from what I've seen. And I don't know anybody that has any like super mega hard opinions on him, at least. Zach Edey rubs people the wrong way a little bit. Listening to some of his comments coming away from their win against Tennessee over the weekend, where he talked about, oh, nobody believed in me, I got overlooked, and all that kind of stuff. Like, bro, you're 7'4". Don't play the underdog card. You know what I mean? Like, you were very sought after. You were very wanted. Now, does the NBA want you? Maybe not necessarily, but from a college perspective, you're that big, you're going to land somewhere. and obviously is now at Purdue and helping to helping to lead them to this Final Four appearance this weekend. So I'll put them in the face category, but I will put them at risk of turning heel, if that makes sense. Whenever you watch professional wrestling as a kid, or if you do it now still, like I do, there were always those faces that flipped back and forth where, hey, for like 6 months they're a good guy, another 6 months they're a bad guy. You just never really knew which side of the coin they were going to be on. I feel like Purdue very much occupies that space of like, yeah, they're not maybe bad guys, but they could be at the drop of the hat. You know what I mean? They could get out the steel chair and hit their tag team partner in the back with it, and suddenly you hate them. Like, I feel like they kind of straddled that line a little bit. UConn is unequivocally a heel. I think that goes without saying. They're a long-standing college basketball power that's known to casuals. Like, if you think college basketball, if you're not a mega fan, you probably know UConn's pretty good. Like, that's not hard to figure out. They obviously won last year, and they've been on a dominant run to the Final Four this year. Best margin of victory. They had a 30-point run against Illinois the other day. Just an unreal team that is probably the favorite going into this weekend to win the national championship. Dan Hurley really puts it over the top. That dude is a that dude is a wrestling manager turned a college basketball coach, in my opinion. Dude is not afraid to say things on the microphone that are a little brash, a little controversial, very entertaining, very good for content purposes, but that rubs people the wrong way. There's a cockiness to him, like I said, a brashness to him, which, hey, as long as you're winning, that's great. But as soon as things start going in your other way, people are going to be pointing and saying, not so tough now, are you, huh? But I think without a doubt, UConn, they embrace it. I think they occupy the heel role, and I think they do it pretty well. Alabama's interesting because I think we're naturally inclined to think of them as a heel because of the power of what their football program's done over the past 15 years under Nick Saban. But basketball, I'd say, doesn't convey the same emotions from a national standpoint. Now, a little more locally and regionally here, yes, we have thoughts and opinions on Alabama from the standpoint of we know the intricacies of that program. We know about Nate Oates and how he is. But I don't think from a national standpoint people view it in quite that same way. They're just like, oh, hey, look, Alabama's good at basketball now. That's cool. I don't think people are too necessarily offended by it. However, and I was listening to Bill talk to Jamie Bradford yesterday on the early game, he brought up a good point. Is there well, they just have it all, don't they, factor playing into this as well? Because, again, we've known Alabama as a perennial power in college football for over a decade. And now that, okay, well, Nick Saban is moving away or retiring, and maybe they're going to fall back down a little bit. Well, now guess what? Their basketball program's really great. Now they're making Final Fours. They just have it all, don't they? Why do those guys have all the nice things? We want some of the nice things over here. So that could play into it a little bit. Again, Nate Oates is a very unlikable person, in my opinion, and the opinion of a lot of people, just because of how he comes off and some of the things that he says and the way that he carries himself a little bit. So I'm going to slide Alabama into the heel role as well. Not quite as big a heel as UConn, but definitely not a babyface, if that makes sense. Now, depending on how this weekend goes and how they react to whatever happens, could Alabama become more of a heel? Absolutely. Could Purdue turn heel? Yes. Could UConn turn face? No, I don't think so, because Dan Hurley's going to have something to say whether they win or lose this weekend. I think the only team that we can safely assume is staying babyface no matter what this weekend is NC State, because if they win it all, it's a great story. If they lose in the Final Four or in the national championship game, it's still a great story regardless. And it's still going to be, that team that everybody kind of rallied around a little bit as they went on this, went on this magical run. So there you go. Heels and faces of men's basketball. I'll dive into women's basketball a little bit later on in the day, maybe on the halftime show, as I'm flying solo today with no Terry Ford. But, yeah, just it's going to be a fun weekend for me. Final Four, WrestleMania, all coming together at the same time. I'm going to have to kind of dual screen that a little bit, but colliding kind of the best of both worlds there with heels and faces for the men's Final Four. If you have any thoughts, who you think is a heel and a face going into this weekend, let me know. Firehouse Subsex on 803-404-6100. We'll come back and wrap up today's edition of The Extra Point. Get you set for the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on The Game. Welcome back in. Tyler Head along with you on the Extra Point. couple more minutes to go. Then we'll slide in the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs with Wes and Chris jumping in here with me as spring practice rolls along. Again, Coach Beamer's presser coming up today at 12:30 that we'll have for you on the halftime show as we get his thoughts on what is week number three of spring practice now. It's going along pretty quickly. And again, the spring game coming up on April the 20th, and a lot of sports, a lot of storylines, a lot of things to figure out with this team, and kind of finalizing what it's going to look like when it's all said and done for when the season rolls around. And even about this point, before that, starting off against a team like Old Dominion, I don't think that's even going to answer all the questions that we have about this team going into the season. I think week number 2 against Kentucky is going to be the real litmus test for where we're at, who's going to be the stars of this team, who's going to, be the players to watch, that kind of stuff. And then soon after, it's the stretch run of the gauntlet that is the SEC schedule for South Carolina in 2024. So again, Coach Beamer coming up at 12:30. Get his thoughts as spring practice rolls along. We're now at the Firehouse Subs text line 803-404-6100. We talked so much in the in the first hour about women's basketball. Obviously, last night's games between LSU and Iowa, and then UConn and Southern Cal, and rightfully so. Talked a lot about Caitlyn Clark and the numbers that she was able to put up last night against LSU to punch another ticket to the Final Four for her and her Iowa Hawkeyes. And have somebody weighing in on the Firehouse Subs text line here, 803-404-6100, saying don't forget to point out the assist for Caitlyn Clark as well. And that's a really good point to bring up because, 41 points, grabbed 7 rebounds, but also 12 assists in that game last night against LSU. So she is not – I know there can be a perception of somebody like Caitlyn Clark who just takes a lot of shots and, scores at the clip that she does, that she can be a little bit of a ball hawk, but she does a good job of spreading the ball around, and her teammates certainly do what they can to get the ball to her when the situation warrants it, and she has a good look to drain one of those deep threes. But she doesn't hog the ball. She passes it around, and last night was another example of that with her. Having those 12 assists in addition to her 41 points. And again, just not even coming off the court last night. 40 total minutes for her, as Iowa's a team that does not really go deep into its bench. They had a total of 20 minutes off the bench combined between 3 of their players last night. So, that they rely so much on their key players, their starters, to be out there for extended minutes over the course of the game, and that has worked for them up to this point. I do wonder if we do indeed get that rematch between South Carolina and Iowa coming up in the national championship game here, at the end of the weekend, how much that could affect Iowa and how much that could benefit South Carolina, who, again, we know is one of the, if not the deepest teams in all of women's basketball, best team in terms of bench minutes in the entire nation. And when you get into a national championship, deep into a tournament, after having already played 2 days before in the Final Four, having that kind of deep bench could pay a lot of dividends. And for South Carolina to not only do that, not only bring fresh bodies onto the court, but it give a variety of options, variety of looks, variety of different lineups that Iowa, up to this point, just does not quite have the capability of doing. Which, again, what they do is great with Clark and shooting the threes and the way they play on the perimeter a lot. That's great. A little bit of a post presence there, as I brought up Kate Martin and what she was able to do down the paint. So, but they just don't have the depth that South Carolina does. Now, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves because South Carolina still has to beat North Carolina State, and Iowa would still have to beat UConn, which is not going to be an easy task for either one of those teams, for them to eventually get the rematch in the national championship. But man, it's one of those things. And, you know, I mentioned this earlier when James called in that I think the bracket was set up for this to happen. I think, you know, the powers that be know how big of a ratings bonanza South Carolina and Iowa would be for a national championship as it was, you know, for in the Final Four a season ago. And being so close you can taste it, only being one game away for each of these teams getting this rematch, like I think we all want to manifest it happening, just speak it into existence. Like, we're so close. We want to see it finally happen. And, you know, we got to get through each of their games on Friday night to see if that ultimately comes to fruition for coming up this weekend. But, man, what a matchup that would be on Sunday if you can get South Carolina and Iowa part 2 for the national championship this time around. So we'll break those games down plenty more as the week goes along, getting you set for the nationals or for the Final Four national championship on the men and women's side coming up at the end of this weekend out there in Cleveland and Phoenix. That'll do it for today's edition of the Extra Point. Coming up next, it is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. We'll get Wes and Chris's thoughts on what happened in women's basketball last night. Also jump into more conversation about spring football ahead of hearing from Coach Beamer coming up today at 12:30. That's all coming up on The Game.
Of course, the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, which we're going to begin here in just minutes here on the game. It's up next. Sponsored every single day by our friends at Firehouse Subs. Tyler, they have a new sub available. It is back for a limited time only. They've actually had this one before, but I honestly, I hate to say it, I've never had it, so I'm going to go get it. It's the new Firehouse Sub Barbecue Cuban Sub. That just sounds delicious, and after I describe it, you'll be sold, I think. Slow smoked pulled pork, honey ham, melted Swiss, golden mustard barbecue sauce, chipotle slaw, and spicy pickle chips. That's all packed on a toasted sub roll. Southern roots with a Cuban twist. The way you can go get it, as always, use the Rapid Rescue, firehousesubs.com, or use the Firehouse Subs app to log in, create an account, make sure you earn some rewards on future purchases. That's the new barbecue Cuban sub. Limited time, firehousesubs.com.